Hello everyone and welcome to D20 in Disguise, your source for expertise on world building, storytelling, and miniature making. Now obviously today's video is going to be slightly different from my usual uploads. In today's quick tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you one technique that really helps add depth and detail to your paint jobs, and that technique is dry brushing. Now some of you may have already heard of dry brushing. It's quite a common technique, and it can be used with practically any type of miniature, whether that's miniature terrain, actual miniature figures, or some other type of miniatures. It can be used almost anywhere and can really add a nice feel to any paint job. If you do end up enjoying today's video, then please be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of my uploads. But without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Welcome to D20 in Disguise. Okay, so the first thing that you'll need to do is actually create whatever you're going to be painting, whether that's an actual miniature figure, a piece of miniature terrain, or some other type of miniature. For me, it's going to be a small stone-like piece of foam, which is supposed to look like some kind of boulder. Now, to create this kind of textured piece of foam, all I did was cut out a semi-spherical piece of foamular using a box cutter and an X-Acto knife. I shaped it to a size that I liked, and then used a ball of tin foil to add that sort of texture to the foam by rubbing it all over the surface of the foam. This adds a really nice stone masonry sort of feel, and it's a really easy technique to use. All you need is your piece of miniature terrain and a ball of tin foil. Now that you have your actual object or miniature, which is actually going to be painted, let's start by mixing some paints. Now of course, because I'm trying to make a miniature boulder, I'm going to be using a lot of gray tone. But of course you can transfer this to whatever tone of color, whatever color you're going to be using for your final miniature. So let's start by popping open our black paint and putting a bit into our first slot here. And then putting a bit of white to top that off. Not too much white, just a bit. Try to make a dark starting base tone for your miniature. For me, that's going to be a dark gray base coat. But for, let's say, a wooden floor, you would want a dark brown as your base coat. From there, take whatever brush you're going to be using for your base painting. Any sort of brush will really do. I personally used a very cheap brush for my base coat. And then start to mix your base coat together. And it looks like we have a nice dark gray tone. So we're just going to start by brushing a coat of that onto our miniature, whatever that miniature may be, and I will see you in a minute once I'm done putting this base coat on. Alright, so our dark gray base coat is done. And now all you're going to want to do is just let it dry. You're going to want this base paint to completely dry onto your miniature. So what I'm probably going to do now is clean up my brushes, a bit of my workspace. I see that I got a little bit of paint on my mat. And yeah, just pretty much clean up my workspace. Clean up some of my fingers which got paint on them. And I will see you back once this is dry. Alright, so it's been about 20 minutes and my little piece of foam has dried completely. So now let's actually start dry brushing. Now to do this, you're going to want to mix a slightly lighter blend of your original base paint. So in our gray example, let's make a pretty basic gray, an equal blend between white and black. Alright, now let's just take a different brush than we used before to mix these two together. From there, you're going to want to take your most valuable tool, a fan brush, and just brush that in there real lightly. And now I have some paint on my fan brush. Now I'm going to brush some of this off. You want the bristles of the brush to feel almost completely dry, like there's barely any paint on it. Of course, you can also thrum your fingers across the bristles to make sure that they're almost completely dry. Now, take your brush and begin lightly brushing that slight amount of lighter gray onto your miniature. If you got the right amount of paint onto your brush, it should seem as if this lighter gray is only hitting the highlights, the peaks of your texture. Now obviously it appears as if this is not showing up on the overhead shot, so I will be sure to include a picture of this in the video. Now for this layer of dry brushing, you're going to want to go pretty heavy. You'll really want to hit a lot of the highlights pretty heavily to really brighten up the base paint. However, don't get your brush too wet. If you get your brush too wet, you'll start to put on too much paint unintentionally, and you'll start getting a really ugly effect. So prepare to go lighter rather than heavier with your fan brush. Alright, so this first layer of dry brushing will take barely any time to dry at all. Now, you'll probably want to do a second layer of dry brushing, and to do this, you'll want to use an even lighter tone of gray. Let's add a bit more white to this middle gray, and then mix it up a bit. And as you can see, this makes a lighter gray. Now, you can go as light as you want with this. Usually, I only go with 2 layers of dry brushing on the miniatures which I make, as I think that's sufficient to make the miniature look stylistic. So let's take off most of this darker paint from our brush with our hands, or you can use a paper towel if you'd like. And then dip our brush in our lighter paint. And you can see in the comparison here, it's quite a bit lighter. Now let's get this almost completely dry. Not completely dry, or else you won't get any paint on the miniature. But your brush should be mostly dry. Now let's go through and do another layer of dry brushing. And of course, if you feel like your paint is going a little too thick on your surface, you can always brush it off with your finger like that to diffuse that lighter color among the texture. And from there, I'd say we've created a pretty nice piece of stonework. Of course, this technique works for many different materials you might be trying to mimic in your miniatures, such as wood, stone, metal, bone, skin, and many other materials. And I think that just about wraps up for my quick tutorial on dry brushing. Now again, this technique is very useful, very easy to do, and you can use it on pretty much any miniatures, whether that's miniature terrain, miniature figures, or any other types of miniatures which you may be creating. If you have any questions about dry brushing or any of the techniques which I used in today's video, then please be sure to leave your question in the comments. I'm always sure to read all of the comments, and all of the comments in my videos just really make me smile, especially when someone tries the project which I make in a video and it turns out well for them. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day, keep on creating, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.